We've called this session Into the Mind of a Poet. The first very basic question which any moderator would ask a poet is, what does poetry mean to you, sir?
I think that Yeats said that it was a dialogue between self and soul, but I think that it's more a conversation with yourself. And I think that there's an outer world which we're all, mesmerized by, and we're also plagued by, and we're also hunted by. And then there is a space where the outer world and the inner world meet, and that space is poetry.
How beautifully explained. And that's something that resonates with the poets here as well. My next question is, I read out a huge repertoire of who you are, what you do. Where does poetry fit into the scheme of things, and where do you find time to pursue this art?
What you do is not often who you are, because what you do is a mixture of expectations, both self and otherwise. It's mirroring of what you feel you should be doing. And poetry is, as I said, it's something that I go to when I'm tired of what I have to do.
Wow. I do think that's the case with a lot of us. Not most of us are professional poets, but other than our professions, when we find that quiet moment with ourselves.
The thing is, poetry pays so little that it's very difficult for anybody to be a professional poet.
Sir Ruskin Bond will completely resonate with your thoughts, because he said exactly the same yesterday.
When I was getting married, I went to meet my mother-in-law, and I said, I'd like to marry your daughter. And she said, what do you do? And I said, I'm in public life, I'm in politics. She said, what do you mean? I said, I'm a member of parliament. She said, no, but that's okay, but what do you do? So I had to tell her that I'm a columnist and a poet, and that sort of, made her think slightly better of me. So let's just say poetry is a great defense as well.
How wonderful. And nice to get a slight peek into your personal life as well. Your first collection of poems was titled The Otherness of Self.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting title, and I don't know what it means. Could you...
The otherness of self is, as I said, there's a part of yourself that is sacred, that is hidden, sometimes even from yourself. And to get there, poetry is a syntax that you access. And to hone that syntax, to hone that way, takes you years and years of asking yourself questions for which you have no answers. And the otherness of self came about because I think at the age of 16 or 17, I discovered that I was in love with a girl who I discovered was in love with me, but also about 5 or 6 other people other than me. And I think at the age of 16, you're very tender, and you're very broken. And I'm sure you've done this to lots of boys in your time. But let's just say that what came out of that was that first book. And so when I read that book, it's angry, and it's raw. And I'm very proud of it because you have to go through all those emotions. But Stillness is a metaphysical book, and it's a journey towards stillness. I remember somebody asked me, they said, what does it mean, stillness? And I said, it's a journey, it's not a destination, it's a work in progress, to be still. I remember I went to Rishi Valley for 4 or 5 years in South India. It was a Krishnamurti school. And I remember Pupul Jaikar, who was very close to my grandmother and a great aesthete. And I remember asking her, I said, what should one aspire to? And she said, one should aspire to be still. And it's true. Because if you achieve stillness, then you have conquered the universe.
One should aspire to be still. And that's a thought worth keeping and pondering upon. My voice suddenly went on the bass by itself when that quote came about. The next question I was about to ask you was, did your poems begin at love as well, which you've answered already?
I think love, the lack of love, the hunt for love.
But all of that. And where are your poems journeying? Which terrains are they journeying on at present?
You know, the thing about poetry is that it's a journey into yourself, but also into regions of yourself that you have no idea exist. And as you grow, the space between your heart and your soul becomes infinite. So you actually grow not just outside, but you grow inside infinitely. And what happens is, as you grow into different people, because there are several people that live within us, you know? So each poem is a conversation with a different person who lives within you.
How wonderful. And since Sir's reflections on poems are so beautiful and so beautifully worded and captured, I'm sure a glimpse into his poetry is the logical next thing we should do.
Thank you.
But for...
May I stand there?
Yes, but for one question more.
Who
are the poets you love reading? Very standard, but I do want to know.
You know, I'm going to say something that people are not going to like, which is I don't read a lot of poetry. And I'll tell you the reason why. Because when I started writing, I read poetry and only poetry. And I read all the time. I read Eliot and Keats and Yeats and Yevtushenko. And at that time, my favorite was Pablo Neruda.
I like for you to be still...
You know, and I read a lot of South American poetry. I read Federico Garcia Lorca. I read, you know, Octavio Paz. I read Neruda. I read a lot of that stuff. And then I read, but this book, and it's a very strange thing, is inspired by color. So each poem, if you ask me after I'm done, what color was that, I can tell you. It's very wordy. It's not that it's less wordy. The poems are longer. I've chosen the shorter and more simpler ones. But this book was inspired by my intense love for art. So I was in New York, and I went to the Museum of Modern Art. And how this book started was, I was saying to somebody, I said, you know, if I built my house again, everything would be black and white. And I don't know why I said that. And I went to New York and I looked at a painting by Franz Klein, which was just black and white and single lines, almost like calligraphic. And I looked at it and I said, wow, this is what I want to write. And I had no idea what it meant. But when I came back, I wrote a poem, which I'm not going to read for you today, but I wrote a poem. And then I started looking very deeply at abstract expressionist art, at very literal art, at old masters like Van Eyck and Van Dyck, and a lot of Indian art. And it just spoke to me. And this poem is, and these poems are the resonance of what that art meant to me.
How wonderful. And without further ado, if you can please take the podium. Yes.
There's a word in this called trompe-l'œil. It just means an artistic illusion which is meant to confuse you. This poem is called Departure. A boy with a radiating insurgency, the idea of which lies buried in a garden, poisoned by hope. By an autumn rainbow, you build a shrine, complete with pieces of roses and candid blood. I think with my heart ceramic. Love is no longer this infinite fire. You told me true love lasts forever. I didn't know forever was a day just like today. I protected your hollowed out within like it was a secret God. I thought that love can only be an automatic sign, a liberation from the dense patronage of the night. Of what use is a cruelty veiled by a magnificent madness, a madness inimitable in its complexity, a whirlwind trompe-l'œil? But these are arguments in favor of defeat. I understand the way of the wind and commit myself to the delicate rhythm of departure. This one is called Phantom. Who is it that thinks of me when you say you do? When you think of me, do your eyes think of me differently than your hands? Does your blood accept me as totally as your skin seems to? Your living memory, its membrane, aligned with the change that quickens when creation and destruction form a spiral. Are choices a point of reference? With calculations, they're constant. Resistance caught between a situation and its memories abandoned. Did you buy me sight unseen? Within and without, dispersed, what is it that unity that is formed to make me? Sinking into the wind, feeling the frozen spaces within trees that grow within our memories, that meet you within the openings that are left by the breathlessness of that which stares as you go by, that hides itself inside the immense power of silence. This poem is called Birthday, and it's inspired by the color pink. So if you listen to it, you can just, it's just interesting to know whether you think of it the same way I do. Birthday. In my boxed heart, I have kept for you my most bejeweled and sacralized idea of me, the best of my incompleteness, of what I could have been, of all my shadows disseminated through a primal transference, the tired light within me shining on these gifts of providence and their language of changing communication. Through these fictive winds within, I defocus. The world blurs away from its lost abundance into various shades of grays and browns and blood brilliant. I hand you my animus. All my previous loves, these burnt addictions of mine, they don't call out to me anymore. Can you take me to that field where we find love again? Is it too late to come through home to these darkened roots of the past, through your half-moon eyes, forever or a long time ago? Is it all right if, blind in the face of your incidental gaze, I return half a hero? This one is called Reflection. This old house, its untouched ashen corpse, its parched voice revives the unforgiven smoke of 1,000 faces of attack, a whisper in the soundless halls of decay. I don't want to be this person, sick with want. On the hill, smoke fills this dead afternoon. It moves slowly as the precipice lowers. It comes ahead and looks at you. Ahead seems a clear pass. This day, death is more pungent than ever before. I thought I was where I was, or at least where I wanted to be. In choosing to leave, I know I become space, omnipotent in between. Broken like an early goodbye. The wind comes in like an abandoned wave. Sometimes I try to hold it in, trying to find some oneness. We don't speak now, but from here, I watch the door of your home, hoping. Redemption is so much more difficult if you are constantly staring at your reflection. This poem I wrote when my grandmother died, my maternal grandmother. And it's a bit complicated, but it means a lot to me. It's called Arcana. Yesterday, what did you say to me when we didn't speak? You asked me for something which now you won't say, which you shall ask me every day, and wait for me to feel it till I ask you if that is really what you want. Like an impatient prospector, I head to the mountains. They have a desolate smile. I like the cold. It numbs you. It forces you to look inward, onto the wasteland of the material universe. These large spaces are a vessel for second sight. I try to still my mind to reach a certain level of gnosis, but there's no such thing. It's the oblivion of enormous imaginings. I believed I had to be committed to the truth, but the truth is just half performance and half how much one can endure. Away from the world, I rise, nature being a distillate of an older, truer power, an ingress to the hidden things beneath us. I struggle to carry the day, but I haven't the confidence to self-destruct. I'm glad finally when the night steps in, at first concealed and then brilliantly lit. Yesterday, what did you say to me when we didn't speak? I try and listen harder every day. I remember you picked a lemon and it pierced your skin and your blood ran all over it. I kept it for so long, the silly thing. Death doesn't end relationships, it just changes them. This is called The Lie. And this poem is blue, and it's very obvious that it's blue. The sky is leadened without a desire for color. I feel a sapphire within me ripening, a deeper and hungrier blue, as it expands urgently into my veins. And as hunger only makes you hungrier, I stare down into the parched memories of my past. They say truth is confessional, and you live as you love. You leave a part of yourself with every broken promise. There is an acceptance that you have given in to decay. As days phase into each other, you listen to your blood. In time, you learn to stop savaging those you have, but you never ever forgive yourself. When you try, it's always a lie. This is a very strange poem, and it's very different from anything I ever wrote. It's called The Goddess. There is a goddess who visits me every day. She tells me her story. She used to be a bride, a virgin bride. On her wedding day, they looted and murdered her entire family. Husband, father, all. She lay in her blood and accepted the divine. Now she exists as a goddess, but she hasn't forgotten her cries or screams, and she hasn't forgiven any involved. She is outside karma now, but constantly in the womb of agony. What does it mean to remember? Is it important what has happened? Does it live within us to make us human? Or is this the hell in which we burn for our original sin? She whispers to me powerfully, love is an oath of blood. It's not a catacomb which you build in reaction to your personal desperation. I wonder whether it's an equal exchange, this life, this weight that we carry in the expectation that someone will accept us, validate us. I had a dog. He's dead now. He went with anyone. He seemed happy enough. I tell the goddess about him. It makes things lighter. This was the first poem that I wrote for this new book. It's called Midnight. And oddly enough, I was inspired by the color white when I wrote it. Midnight. Between us, these dark delights tell me the heart is a bad place, a concrete room for sunken desire. The moon, as a symbol for memories exiled from the universe, the retraction of which is an infused meditation. Dreams create new alliances, new ways to protect themselves, ensuring the continuance of their fragility. In this cold night, you seek me out and ask me to reveal myself. Through a window, I must stumble. Through a door, I must slide. If all life is a dialogue between etherea and ephemera, I prefer not to have to explain myself. The night is already aflame, pregnant with the narrative of tomorrow. It's not the tears of the moon that enclose me, it's the unbearable silence of God. This one is called, it's called The Sea. I have never really seen the sea. I have only seen my sorrow through it. I have heard my song in it. I have seen it as a process that doesn't explain itself. I see in you an aura that is floating. I see a voice that has never spoken, the sound of the fullest whisper. We sit by the water and chant to keep something alive. Time writes its own elegy. Slowly your stories become mine. You give me a reason to move away from the transparent darkness within, to use the dissonance at my core to feel that I want to be here, to give you more than the obvious, to create a reaction of equal force. The future need seek no reason, how far from the world we have come. I'll just read this last one. It's called The Warrior. Yeah. Within these marbled embers, a forgotten time made aware of its need to awaken its ossified sense of peace. I kiss my own goodbye and urge my stubborn fate to stand by me one last time, praying to my previously mistreated weapons, the only permanent companions in this journey, which is as shaken as it is symbolic. I gouge my way forward into my past crepuscularly. Somewhere inside rubs together a primordial reach, a call to war, to belong to no more than the stars, to salvage the heat of which blood is born. The once formed I, the violent stretching of one's strength, unburdens any coyness. The night of judgment that births this sacrifice bends in gesticulation. Who amongst us is a priest? Who a suffering sinner? There lies a pagan, godless amongst the fire, leaves, wind. The fire speaks. Who amongst you doesn't come from me? The earth speaks. Who amongst you shall not return to me? The wind hushes. Shall I be valued only in my destruction? The mind of the forest finds grace, carrying generations of residue. Something approaches, it has a deeper command over itself, existing outside of time. Past these shamed mirrors, there lies a cage of anger. It rules the heart of the trapped man within. Amongst these cobwebs of time, I enter into the pain that has been the only home that I've ever known. I take this child, lead him into my skin, a blood that gives him ownership into safety and sleep. Going back and forth into my breath, my bones I must give equally of myself in order to release the nothingness of that which has been. Within darkened roses and hardened nectar, still seeps a silent rising. that in its embers is a cousin to the most powerful stars. How can I believe in the miracle of this world if I can't lay my love down securely in its eyes? Once known and held tightly, it releases you with the strength of 1,000 gods. I must make my way now onto that which has been lost. Thank you. There were lots more poems. I decided not to make anyone else suffer.
No, not at all. There was no suffering, but the thing with poetry is, yes, can we? At times, writing poems and even trying to interpret them is an act of frustration. I'm not sure suffering. But what I did realize while hearing your poems were, poems need effort in terms of uncovering the layers in order to reach the core of perhaps what the poet was trying to say.
True.
And there's always a perhaps. You can still never uncover what truly was there.
True.
And more so when you hear poems, because you have to keep moving forward with its meaning and uncovering the layers along with the poet. Now, I'll just try and demystify a couple of things with them. So first, which is the color which has the most depth in terms of your exploration of it and why?
White.
Why?
Because it's the color to which all colors aspire to end themselves in.
Right. And is there a color of frustration? Is there a color of despair which is not black?
You know, all colors mean the same thing at different times. So white can be a color of anger, and it can be, I'll give you an example. You know the painter Van Gogh, yeah? So when you look at his work, it's very bright, it's very happy, it's very almost surreally bright, right? But he had the most miserable life that you could ever think of. So sometimes it's a catharsis, and sometimes it's an externalization. But my poetry is not that. My poetry is a severe internalization.
And since you mentioned Van Gogh and misery, does poetry necessarily lie in misery? Does happiness ever breed poems?
Of course, yeah. I mean, the thing is that all these poems are about love, right? So love and misery and lust and greed and anger and all of it are just faces of want, right? So if you don't want anything, then you are still. And that's why the last book was called Stillness, because that's something I aspire towards. But if you want, then you are all these things and more together. So all these things exist implicationally, right? Like darkness implies light, and all of these things would not exist without without each other. So,
absolutely. The book that's coming, it's called Surrender. When does it come out? 2000?
Next year.
Next year. Now, since whenever I ask you about the title of a book, you took me to a deeper meaning of where does the genesis of titling lie? Who is surrendering via the poems that you've written in your next book?
You know, the thing is that I genuinely felt that there comes a point in your life where you need to completely surrender. But surrender to what? I'm not quite sure. But I know this about myself, that I felt that I must surrender my anger, and that I must surrender any feeling within me that didn't expand me, that wasn't expansive. And, you know, ultimately, the only expansive feeling is love. You know,
Absolutely.
Everything else sort of diminishes you a little bit.
Absolutely.
So,
right. Your
maybe I need to surrender to that girl who's sort of
the
in love with too many people.
love. I hope she's watching it somewhere. Hello, you've given birth to a tremendous poet whom we are sitting here and listening to. So Stillness, it received tremendous audience response. And I've been told, and I've read Stillness. It broke sales records. Do your readers...
I think that may have had something to do with my last name, though.
But eventually it has to do with poetry. No, eventually it all has to do with poetry. And what I was wanting to ask was, do your readers engage with you?
I'll tell you. The thing is, I'll tell you. Stillness and the Otherness of Self were not real books. What they were was pastiches of what I had written and what I had thought at separate times. This is the first book that end to end has been written. And I write a lot of columns. I wrote a column for The Hindu yesterday, for the Economic Times last week, for NDTV the week before that. So as I get older, I find that I have less time to indulge myself. But poetry is not an indulgence to me. It is a place that I go that is sacred to me. And in this sacralized place, I talk to different people within me. And it is these conversations that play out as poetry. But yeah. So sorry, I didn't get the question.
That's okay.
You
answered something else.
Somebody very smart once told me that you should never answer the question. You should just say exactly what you want to say anyway. But just say it very politely.
To me. No, we had a beautiful,
I don't even think we talk to each other. I think we only ever talk to ourselves.
Wow.
So...
Wonderful. But what we are getting to hear from you, there's a certain measure of serenity and calmness, not just in the way you talk, but even in the way your poems communicate to us.
When my daughter died about 5-6 years ago, and I thought to myself, after I was done grieving, I thought that it freed me, because when I grew up, I felt tremendously insecure, I felt angry, I felt confused. And the only reason you feel these things is because you want something. And when my daughter died, and we tried very hard to save her, we were in the hospital for months and months. And when I buried her, because you bury little children, I felt that everything that I was seeking, everything that I sought, everything that I hunted, everything that hunted me, I felt that it was, very ephemeral. I felt that it was meaningless and it was small. And I pitied myself for wanting anything like that. And when you don't want anything in that wretched and possessed way anymore, then you're free. And when you're free, you realize that the only thing that matters in life is love. And there's nothing else in life that exists. Everything else is illusory. And politics is the most wretched of all professions, because everybody leaves politics a loser. Everybody. And the only way to do what you want to do, to be a maverick, to say what you want to say, is to really not care. And the only thing that matters is kindness, and the only thing that matters is what you give. I met Mother Teresa before she died. And she was a very tough old bird, and I liked her very much. And I said to her, Mother, can you tell me something of importance that will stay with me, that will be a sort of, something that will guide me? And she said, be of use. Be of use to people around you. Be of use to people less fortunate than you. Just be of use. And yeah.
I don't think I should technically have any question after hearing these thoughts from you.
Does that mean you're kicking me out?
Absolutely not.
Is that a polite way of saying get out?
I'm doing nothing of the sort. I value my life and my existence. I'm doing nothing of the sort. But in fact, I have been asked to extend this session a lot more.
You know, I tell you what, it was a real pleasure. And I've actually come to Bhopal for a different program that's going to succeed this. But I went to Bangalore to read my poems once. And Javed Saab was also there, obviously in a more celebrated session. And when I left, I felt very liberated. And so actually the only reason that I've come here is to selfishly liberate myself. Your claps are an added bonus.
Has the mission been successful?
Sure, I feel great.
So, because I have to cap this session somewhere.
Thank you.
The only last thing I would want to know from you is, I've read The Otherness of Self briefly. I've read The Stillness from cover to cover. And surrender is the next thing to look.
You have my condolences.
Okay, no. I enjoyed myself thoroughly because, so there are spoken poets and there are read poets. Yeah. And your poems, I would, as a reader, I would make them fall into the latter category. Because someone once told me, a very ardent reader, student of mine, and she said, you know, Didi, books and stories and poems should be read with as much diligence as they were written. And that thought stayed with me.
You know, I don't feel that at all. I feel that there's a line in every poem or in a good poem that just grabs you.
Absolutely.
And that's all that stays with you. The rest is just...
Absolutely. But since you mentioned condolences, I have gone back to some poems. Because of perhaps that one line that stayed with me. But when you read it under a certain different mental condition, it reveals another meaning to you. So I've enjoyed myself. But if you were to tell me to have one takeaway from your poems that are coming up in the next book, what would that be as a reader?
You know, I let a lot of stuff go in this book, and I want to tell you an anecdote of what I was thinking on my flight here. I was actually saying this to somebody. You know, when I went to Oxford to do my entrance, you have to do an interview. And in Oxford, the system is very strange. So the person that's interviewing you has nothing to do with what you're interviewing for, because I was told by my mother to do law or to do economics, anything that gets a job. And here I am reading poetry. So I went there to do law, and the professor looked at my UCAS form and he said, "You like reading. So what do you like reading?" And I looked out. It was December in England, not the best time. And I thought I must say something fancy. So I said, "I like reading literary criticism." But I had no idea what it meant. And he looked at me and he said, "Who's your favorite literary critic?" And I said, "Henry David Thoreau," because I had just finished reading On Walden Pond. And he said, "Henry David Thoreau wasn't a literary critic." And I looked at my future going up in smoke, and I said, "Okay, now I must say something, you know, really interesting." And I said, and I leaned forward and I said, "Professor, his entire life was an act of literary criticism." And he looked at me and he said, "Mr. Gandhi, either you'll be a great man one day," and he paused, "or you'll be a spectacular bullshitter your whole life." And I went to LSE actually, so he obviously thought a lot of me. And I went there 1 year later, and I met him, Professor Pigu, and I said, "Professor, now that I know it's the latter, where do I go from here?" And he said, "I think you should take a seat in the Indian Parliament." So here I am.
Wonderful. So it was lovely talking to
Thank you,
Shri Gandhi.
Thank you.
Thank you for being a wonderful audience. Can we have a huge round of applause for Sir once more?